All right, class. Now we're going to talk about direct objects. So the first thing we want to know is how do you identify a direct object? First, you have to understand what it is in English, all right? So here on this slide, what we find is what is a direct object? It is what is receiving the action in the sentence. For example, here we have two of them right here. My daughter kicks me. So what you have to look at when you're looking at a sentence, in order to identify the direct object, you have a subject, which acts on the verb, which then acts on the object, which is normally the direct object. Okay? So if we look at this sentence, here we have my daughter, that's the subject, kicks is the verb, and what's being kicked? Me. So that's the direct object. The direct object answers the question, what is being kicked? Or take the verb and put it into question, and that will tell you what is being done to. For example, here in the second one, the dog ate my homework yesterday. So you have to look at it. One, here's the dog is the subject. Ate is the verb. And then what was eaten? My homework. So my homework is the direct object. It is what was eaten. So here are a few simple rules that govern how to identify the direct object. One, it must follow an action verb. All right. Will answer whom or what after the action verb. And last of all, will be a noun or a pronoun that's being acted upon. For example, in this little picture, oops, the bike hit Derek. So I guess that makes Derek the direct object. The bike is the subject. It's falling out of the sky and squashes poor Derek right here on the bottom. Derek was receiving the end of the action. So now that we understand how to identify a direct object, what's the point of the direct object pronouns? The point of the direct object pronouns is to make speech more efficient. So instead of saying, for example, in the last slide we saw, if we know that we're talking about Derek, in this case, right, we know we're talking about him, we're going to use a pronoun to replace his name. Typically, when we replace Derek, we're going to say him. Him is a direct object pronoun. So the bike hit him instead of Derek, because we already know that we're talking about Derek. It's implied in the conversation. So let's take a look at the different direct object pronouns that are found in English. First of all, the first one we find is me. Whoops. The first person pronoun is me in English. And for the second pronoun, it's you. For the first person plural, it's us. We wouldn't say we because we is a subject pronoun. And then here on the bottom, we have he, or no, that's not it. That's wrong. We're going to go with him and her. We can't use he or she because those are all subject pronouns. These are direct object pronouns. Subject pronouns cannot be used in the place of direct object pronouns. And we'll show that to you a little bit later. Then we have you all. And then for last, we have them for the plural form, third person plural. Now, what are they in Spanish? The Spanish pronouns are ones that we've already had some experience with. It looks similar. It's me, te, nos, and os. And then for these ones, they have the same, they match in number and gender. So we have lo, la, and for them, it's los and las. That's an S. Okay? So these ones are going to match in both masculine and feminine form, depending on what they're replacing, the noun that they're replacing. Okay? So here's just a note of how you can identify or how you can be successful in identifying the direct objects in Spanish. One, you have to know your vocabulary. That makes it tons easier. You have to be able to identify your verbs. If you know your vocabulary, you can identify your verbs. Understand what direct object is and how it is identified. That's very important. If you understand the concept, that makes it easier also. So you have to know your vocabulary. You need to be able to identify the verbs because remember, there's the subject which acts on the verb, which then acts on the direct object. If you understand this concept here, that's part of it. That's like 50%. But if you know your vocabulary, you'll be able to identify the subject, and then you know whatever's after the subject is actually the verb. And if you know your verbs, you can identify the direct objects because it answers the question, what was being done to? So let's look at a Spanish example, okay? Because we're going to look at placement. Typically what we find is, like, for example, in the first one we have my daughter kicks me. Me is the direct object. It's what's being kicked. Now when we translate over into Spanish, we have mi hija patea a mí, all right? But we're going to replace that with one of those pronouns. But because it's the yo form in the first person, we're going to use me. Now, if you look, here it is with the direct object pronoun. This is the direct object pronoun. So typically in a sentence, we have the subject, which acts on the verb, which then acts on the direct object. But when we replace this with a pronoun, we're actually putting it between the verb and the subject. As you can see here, mi hija is the subject, and patea is the verb, and then the direct object goes before the verb. Let's look at another example. Here it is. Marcos has to give the books to Maria. So we know that the books is the direct object. Disregard that. That's the indirect object. Marcos has to give the books to Maria. So what is being given? The books. To who? To Maria. Okay, so here in Spanish we have Marcos tiene que dar los libros a Maria. So instead of saying the books, because it's implied in the speech, we're going to say them. In English, we don't change the placement. Marcos has to give them to Maria. We know what them are. We know they are the books, and they're being given to Maria. But we want to make it more efficient. So if somebody were to ask, to whom is Marcus giving the books? Or what is he giving to Maria? Then we'd say he's giving them to Maria, the books. Okay? So Marcos los tiene que dar. All right? So we're replacing los libros with los, because on that chart, it's the plural form, and it's masculine. So Marcos los, and it goes before the conjugated verb, okay? Right here, here's tener. Tiene que dar, all right? So Marcos los, that's one option. We put it before the conjugated verb between the subject and the verb. Or if we have two verbs like we have here, dar is one verb, tiene is another, we can actually connect it to the end of the infinitive. The infinitive is the verb that is not conjugated. It's just like an AR, IR verb ending. All right? So in this case, we have two options because we have two verbs. Before, Marcos los tiene que dar a Maria. And then we have the number two. Marcos tiene que darlos a Maria. So for understanding placement, if we have one verb, we have one choice. It goes before the conjugated verb, between the subject and the verb. Number two, if we have two verbs, we have two choices. It will either go before the conjugated verb or connected to the end of the infinitive.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.